I think this is a great topic, and I think it's important academically to start with Thomas Kuhn. I hope everyone is familiar with the structure of scientific revolution. It's really important to read, particularly for the students. And I think what we're really grappling with is exactly a Kuhnian question. Is it time to, we have the paradigm, the amyloid hypothesis, and is it time to overturn the paradigm? And for those who know me, and some know me better than others, I actually I criticize the amyloid hypothesis, and I'll tell you why in a second, at least the way it's framed. But I still don't think we've reached the tipping point in a Kuhnian sense to overthrow it. So I would say we should be careful in trying to instigate revolutions until there's justified evidence. I'll tell you my biggest concern with the hypothesis, and to the credit of the framers of the hypothesis, it's a true scientific hypothesis, and at some point I'd like to hear everyone's view, whether they accept it or not. What would be the way to refute the hypothesis? Because that's what worries me sometimes when I discuss this. People say, well, if we just go early, I mean, that's reasonable. So there has to be a way to try to refute it. Otherwise, again, in terms of just basic science, it's not a hypothesis. But the framers of the hypothesis were very clear that it's extracellular amyloid plaques that are driving the disease. And that's where I think there might be a solution. And I'm not also by nature an appeaser, but I think there might be a way to resolve the amyloid hypothesis, because, or to modify it, which is not just semantic but fundamental. I do think that intracellular fragments of APP, whether it's A beta or C-terminal fragments, are the true neurotoxins. And I say that mainly, and we all have our lists of pros and cons in favor or against the amyloid hypothesis. From my perspective, as a kind of functional neuroanatomist, cell biologist, the biggest problem with the amyloid hypothesis is that you have a lot of plaque that doesn't co-vary spatially where you have pathology. Now, there are ways to resolve that, but an easy way to resolve that is to ask, where do you have a lot of intracellular fragments of APP? And there you then do start seeing it in the entorhinal cortex, the hippocampus. So I would say that one way to tweak in a substantive way the amyloid hypothesis is not that it's extracellular plaques, but it's intracellular fragments of APP. And the reason why that's not just semantics, and I've had this discussion with John Hardy and with others, is because if you think about it, the dominant therapeutic intervention is against the extracellular plaque. That's what the immunotherapy is for. And I will go on record, I have gone on record, we're being filmed now, I do think that the immunotherapies might have some subtle benefit, but I don't think they're going to really work because of the reasons I just mentioned.
So I'm going to present the other pathology in more emphasis, because I think people have left out the importance of tau. And I think the original framers of the amyloid cascade hypothesis just didn't know what we know now about the impact and the importance of other parts of the pathology progression and the impact that tau has on the disease. And I like to start to think of it as a sort of A beta dependent and then A beta independent phases of the disease. And I think that should actually indicate or guide us in how we start to deal with the disease therapeutically, when we intervene, etc. And I think one of the things that's really come up as being an important part of the disease is this idea that A beta and tau can become dissociated in cause and effect and trigger and executioner, and that you actually, tau will take off and propagate and spread, and that can cause, considerable damage. So I think we need to just reframe, I agree, we need to reframe the hypothesis, and I think we need to get away from the A beta-centric idea, but we have to look at the phase of the disease that you're in to determine whether the importance of those things. I personally think that A beta probably is not responsible for the overt cell death that you see in the disease. That's probably tau. And I feel that tweaking A beta with therapeutics will probably recover some of the synaptic dysfunction. But personally, I think the mouse models have shown us actually quite well that you're not going to completely, the mouse models with APP and A beta don't have particularly bad cognitive impairment. And I suspect that by tweaking A beta with immunotherapy or whatever, you're going to rescue some of the cognition, but you're not going to rescue the disease, because I think it's then taken over by tau. So I think we should reframe it, but with the idea that there are perhaps different phases. A beta perhaps is necessary but not sufficient. and that at some point we have to decide, is it worth tweaking A beta anymore? You're going to get a little bit of cognitive improvement, but then is tau just going to destroy the brain because it's dissociated? So very complex disorder now, much more complex than the original framers I thought. And not only for the reasons that Scott has identified, that we don't even know, what the form of A beta we should be tracking and removing is, but also tau.